My darlings, I see you, all of you, 12 signs, and tonight I want to speak directly to four. Four signs in the zodiac are structurally built to receive unexpected news, and I want to be careful with that phrase at the very start, because it is used loosely, and I intend to use it precisely. I do not mean that four signs are luckier than the rest. I do not mean that the sky has arranged something specific for four of you this month and forgotten the others. I mean something more interesting and considerably more permanent, which is that four signs in the zodiac have rulers whose entire function concerns information, and the way news arrives in a life is shaped by the planet that governs the sign receiving it. That is not a forecast. It is a description of how you are each built, and it was true a decade ago, and it will be true whenever you happen to find this. The four signs are Aquarius, Gemini, Virgo, and Leo, and each of you receives a completely different kind of news through a completely different mechanism, and I am going to take you through all four in that order. I am also going to tell you something at the very end of this video that I consider the single most useful thing I know about receiving news of any kind. It is not advice about what to do when something arrives. It is about something that happens before the arrival, which almost everybody misses, and which is the difference between the people who are ready when the news comes and the people who are ambushed by it. I have watched this pattern for 35 years, and I have never once seen it written down anywhere. I am putting it at the end deliberately, because it will only make sense once you have heard all four signs. But I will tell you now what to listen for, so you can play along. As I describe each of the four, there is a small detail I mention in every single section. It is easy to miss because it sounds like a passing remark each time. If you notice it repeating, you will work out the ending before I get there, and that is a considerably better way to receive it than being told. I am Madame Aurora, 35 years studying the stars from my office in Manhattan, and before I begin with Aquarius, let me explain why these four and not the other 8, because the reasoning is genuinely interesting, and it is not arbitrary. Every sign in the zodiac has a ruling planet, and the ruling planet is not a decoration. It is the mechanism of the sign. It describes how that sign processes the world, and by extension, how information reaches it. Four signs in the zodiac are ruled by bodies whose entire nature concerns the arrival of information, and they are these. Aquarius is ruled, in modern practice, by Uranus, which is the planet of the sudden, not the fast, which is Mercury, and not the powerful, which is Pluto. The sudden, the unforeseen, the thing that was not in any model. Uranus is the only planet whose signature effect is discontinuity, and a sign ruled by it receives news the way a house receives lightning. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is the planet of transmission itself, not the content, the passage, the thing moving from one point to another. A sign ruled by Mercury does not receive one piece of news, it receives news continuously, as a stream, which produces its own particular difficulty. Virgo is also ruled by Mercury, and these are the only two signs in the zodiac who share a ruler. But it expresses in the opposite direction. In Gemini, Mercury faces outward and transmits. In Virgo, Mercury faces inward and analyzes. Same instrument, reversed. And so a Virgo receives news in a form nobody else would recognize as news at all, which I will explain when we get there. And Leo is ruled by the Sun, which is not a planet of information in the obvious sense, and which is precisely why Leo's version is the most misunderstood of the four. The Sun does not carry messages. The Sun illuminates. And a sign ruled by it does not receive news so much as have things become visible, which is a different event entirely and requires a completely different response. Those four mechanisms are permanent. They do not depend on where anything currently sits in the sky. And the other 8 signs of the zodiac receive news too, of course, but it reaches them through a different route, and I will speak to all 8 of you before the end of this video, individually rather than in one dismissive sentence, because I do not believe in rankings that leave most of the zodiac standing outside. Now let us begin. Let us go to Aquarius. My darling Aquarius, the news that arrives for you arrives without warning. I want you to understand how unusual that actually is, because you have lived with it your entire life, and you may assume everyone experiences it this way. They do not. For most signs, news is preceded by something. A period of negotiation. A conversation that was clearly heading somewhere. a slow build in which the outcome becomes gradually more likely until it finally lands. Most people, when something significant arrives, can trace the path it took to reach them. Your sign frequently cannot. Uranus is the planet of the discontinuity, and I want to be precise about what that word means, because it is not the same as speed. A fast thing is still on a trajectory. A discontinuous thing is not on the trajectory at all. It does not come from the direction you were facing. It does not arrive as the next step in a sequence, because it belongs to no sequence you were part of. That is why your news, when it comes, tends to produce a specific sensation that Aquarians describe more consistently than any other sign, which is the feeling that reality briefly skipped. Uranus takes roughly 84 years to complete one circuit of the zodiac, which means it spends about 7 years in each sign. 7 years, my darling, that is a rhythm you can actually work with. It also means that no human being experiences more than one full Uranus return, and most do not live to see it, which tells you something about the scale on which your ruler operates. It is not concerned with your month. So let me be concrete about what your news actually looks like. For some of you, it is an offer from a direction you were not considering. Not a promotion in the role you have. Something laterally adjacent, in a field you had not applied to, from a person who found you rather than the reverse. Aquarian opportunities very frequently arrive through people the person does not know well, which is a genuinely strange feature of your sign, and one I have observed for decades. Your inner circle rarely produces your openings. The third ring does. For some, it is news about a group. Something changes in an organization, a community, a professional body, a circle you belong to, and the change repositions you without your having done anything. Your sign governs the 11th house, the house of groups, networks, and collective enterprise, and a great deal of Aquarian news is structural rather than personal. The room reorganizes and you find yourself standing somewhere different. For some, it is technological or informational in the literal sense. A message from a platform you no longer use. Something surfacing that you had assumed was gone. A piece of information arriving through a channel you did not know was still open. For some, it is news about a person who resurfaces with something entirely unexpected attached. Not simply a reappearance. A reappearance with an offer, a piece of information, a change in their circumstances that alters yours. And for some of you, and this is the version I find most significant, the news is internal. A sudden and complete clarity about your own direction that arrives in a moment of stillness and has no external cause whatsoever. Aquarius is the sign most likely of all 12 to experience a genuine change of course that nobody outside can trace to any event, because there was no event. There was a discontinuity in you. The card I pulled for your sign tonight is the Knight of Swords, a figure at full gallop, sword raised, cloak horizontal behind him, the horse's hooves entirely off the ground. There is no card in the deck with more forward motion in it. And I want you to notice the specific thing about that image, because it is not the compliment it appears to be. The horse is off the ground, all 4 feet, which means that at the moment depicted, the rider has no contact with the earth and no ability to change direction. He is committed to whatever is in front of him, and he will not be able to alter course until he lands. That is your sign at the moment news arrives, my darling. Extraordinary velocity and, for a brief window, no steering. The Knight of Swords is not warning you against moving. It is telling you that there is a short period, right after an unexpected thing lands, in which your capacity to decide well is temporarily reduced, and that the period ends, and that a great deal depends on what you commit to before it does. So here is the guidance for your sign specifically, and it is different from what I will tell the other 3. Do not decide anything on the day. Your sign will want to. Uranian news produces an electrical quality, a sense that the moment is live and must be answered immediately, or the opening will close. My darling, in 35 years, I have almost never seen a genuine opening close within 24 hours. What closes in 24 hours is not an opening, it is a pressure tactic. And Aquarius is unusually susceptible to it because urgency feels like alignment to your sign. Give it 1 full day. That is all. 1 day is enough for the hooves to touch the ground. Let me give you an example, because this is the sort of thing that sounds abstract until it has a shape. An Aquarian client of mine, a woman in her early 40s at the time, was contacted by someone she had met exactly once, 4 years earlier, at a professional event she had almost not attended. The message was not an offer. It was a question about whether she knew anyone who did a particular kind of work. She answered it helpfully, suggested 2 names, and thought nothing further about it. 11 days later, the same person came back and asked whether she would consider it herself. The role was in a sector she had no experience of. It required relocating. Every reasonable part of her said no, and she told me she wrote a polite declining message and did not send it, purely because it was late and she was tired, which is the only reason, and I have never pretended otherwise. She took the position. That was some years ago now. It is the work she still does, and she has described it to me since as the only genuinely correct professional decision of her life, and the thing she returns to, every time we speak about it, is that it did not come from her network. It came from a person she had met once, whose name she had to look up, in a context she had almost not been in. That is Uranian news, my darling. Not the next step in a sequence. The 3rd ring, 4 years later, on a Tuesday. And one more thing before I move on, and I want you to file it rather than act on it. Cast your mind back over the last little while and see whether anything unusual has already brushed past you. A message you did not follow up. A conversation that went somewhere odd for 30 seconds and then returned to normal. A name you have heard twice recently in unrelated contexts. Do not do anything with it yet. Simply note that it happened. I will explain at the end of this video why I am asking. Now, before I move to Gemini, my darlings, let me pause. If what I have said about Aquarius is landing, for you or for someone you know, tap that little like button below this video. It is a small gesture, and it does something real, which is tell YouTube to carry this to more people who are about to receive something they have not planned for. And if you are not yet subscribed, this is the moment, because we have 3 signs left and each mechanism is stranger than the last. Now let me speak to Gemini. My darling Gemini, the news that arrives for you does not arrive alone. That is your entire mechanism, and it is the thing nobody tells you. Your sign does not receive a piece of news. Your sign receives a stream, continuously, all the time, and the difficulty of being a Gemini is not scarcity of information. It is that the significant item arrives in the same format as the 40 insignificant ones, on the same day, in the same channel, in the same tone of voice. Mercury, your ruler, is the planet of transmission itself, not the content, the passage. And Mercury does not distinguish between important and unimportant, because sorting is not its function. Its function is to move things from one point to another, and it moves everything with equal enthusiasm. This is why Geminis so frequently miss the thing that mattered. Not through inattention, through volume. You are the only sign in the zodiac for whom the primary risk is not that the news will fail to arrive, but that it will arrive on a Tuesday between 2 other things and be filed at the same priority as both of them. Your ruler also has a schedule, and I want you to know it, because it will spare you a great deal of unnecessary interpretation for the rest of your life. Mercury turns retrograde 3 or 4 times a year, for roughly 3 weeks each time. Every sign feels it. Yours feels it structurally, because Mercury is not a visitor to your chart, it is the mechanism of it. And here is what I want to tell you about those weeks that is more useful than the popular account. They are when things come back. Messages, people, information, opportunities that were previously in motion and stalled. If your news arrives during one of those windows, it will very often be a returning item rather than a new one, and returning items require a different response than new ones do. Let me be concrete about what your news actually looks like. For some of you, it is the reply, something you sent, proposed, applied for, or offered, that has been sitting in silence long enough that you stopped expecting it. And I want to say something specific about this version, because Geminis handle it badly, in a predictable way. When a long-delayed answer finally arrives, your sign responds from the relief of the loop closing, rather than from an assessment of what is actually being offered, and those produce very different replies. For some it is financial, money that moves unexpectedly, an invoice paid far earlier than anticipated, a settlement, a refund, a rate accepted without the negotiation you had prepared for. Gemini news very often has a number attached, and the number is usually smaller than you would have wanted and larger than you expected, which is a peculiar combination that your sign is well suited to hold. For some, it is a piece of information about a person, something you did not know, something that recontextualizes a relationship, sometimes favorably, sometimes not. Your sign is a conduit, and things reach you about other people constantly, and the discipline required is not curiosity, which you have, but discretion, which is more work. For some, it is an invitation to speak, to write, to teach, to join, to represent. Gemini opportunities cluster around the voice, and they very often arrive from someone who has been quietly reading, listening, or watching for considerably longer than you would guess. And for some of you, the news is that two separate things you already knew turn out to connect. This is the most Geminian version of all, and I want to name it clearly, because nobody would recognize it as news. Nothing new arrives. Two existing items suddenly relate to each other, and the relation is the information, and it changes something. The card I pulled for your sign is the Seven of Cups. A figure in silhouette facing 7 cups suspended in cloud, each containing something different. A face, a jeweled treasure, a wreath, a serpent, a shrouded figure. They are not arranged in order of value, and there is no indication of which is which. That is your sign receiving news, my darling. Not scarcity. 7 cups, all of them plausible, all of them presented identically, and no labeling. And here is the specific instruction the card carries, which most readers get wrong. The Seven of Cups is not warning you that the options are illusions. Some of them are entirely real. It is warning you that they are being presented in a way that makes evaluation nearly impossible, and that your sign's response to an unevaluable array is to become interested in all of it, which is the same as choosing nothing. So here is your guidance, and it is different from Aquarius. When news arrives, write down what it actually says. Physically. In plain language, in one sentence, stripped of implication. I know that sounds insultingly simple. It is the single most effective thing I know for your sign, and here is why. Between the arrival of information and your consideration of it, your mind performs an enormous amount of elaboration, extremely fast, and by the time you begin thinking about the news, you are already thinking about a version of it that includes 11 inferences you generated yourself. That elaboration is your greatest gift in almost every other context. In this one, it means you rarely respond to what was said. One sentence. What was actually stated? Then think. I will give you one more thing, because your sign benefits from a second instrument. Once you have the sentence, ask what the person sending it wants. Not what it means for you, which you will have modeled in 11 directions before you finished reading it. What do they want? Almost all news is sent by somebody, and somebody sending something nearly always has a purpose, and the purpose is frequently plainer and smaller than the elaborate structure you have built around the message. A great many Geminis have spent a fortnight interpreting an email that was, on inspection, a person asking a simple question and hoping for a simple answer. And before I move on, my darling, the same small thing I asked of Aquarius. Cast your mind back. Has something already passed through in the last while that you registered and did not act on? A remark someone made, a half offer, a piece of information you filed and did not follow. Do not act on it. Simply note that it happened. I will explain shortly. Now let me speak to Virgo. My darling Virgo, your news arrives as a detail. And this is the strangest of the 4 mechanisms. And it is why your sign so frequently receives significant news and does not recognize it as news for weeks. You share a ruler with Gemini. Mercury governs you both, and you are the only 2 signs in the zodiac who share a ruler at all, but it operates in the opposite direction. In Gemini, Mercury faces outward and transmits. In you, it faces inward and analyses. Same instrument, reversed polarity. And what that means practically is this. Your sign does not experience news as an announcement. Your sign experiences it as a discrepancy. A small thing that does not fit. A number that is slightly wrong. A tone in an email that is fractionally different from the previous 11 emails from the same person. A phrase somebody used that was very slightly not the phrase they would ordinarily use. My darling, you notice these constantly. You have noticed several this week, and your sign's habit is to register the discrepancy, feel a brief unease, and then talk yourself out of it, because you have been told your entire life that you overthink, and because you have no evidence, and because raising it would require you to say out loud that you drew a large conclusion from a very small thing. Here is what I want to tell you, and I want to be quite firm about it. You are not overthinking. You are running the most sensitive detection instrument in the zodiac, and the reason it produces conclusions you cannot justify is that it operates on inputs too small to be presented as evidence to anyone else. That does not make them wrong. Let me be concrete about your news. For some of you, it concerns your work, and it arrives before it is announced. A change in workload, a meeting that is scheduled slightly differently, a person who is suddenly copied on things. You will know something is happening approximately 3 weeks before anybody tells you, and you will spend those 3 weeks wondering whether you are inventing it, and then you will be told, and your response will be a strange mixture of vindication and exhaustion. For some, it concerns the body, a symptom that changes character, something that has been the same for 2 years and is now marginally different. My darling, this is the category where I most want your sign to trust the instrument and act on it, and it is the category where you are most likely to postpone, because you would rather not be the person who made an appointment about something small. Make the appointment. You have earned considerably more benefit of the doubt from yourself than you extend. For some, it concerns another person, and it arrives as a change in a pattern rather than a statement. Somebody's routine alters slightly. Somebody stops mentioning something they always mentioned. You will notice the absence, which is remarkable, because almost nobody notices absences. And for some, it is recognition, which is the category your sign is least equipped to receive. Somebody has been observing your work and says so, and the saying of it arrives as news precisely because you had assumed nobody was watching, since nobody had said anything. My darling, the silence was not indifference. It was simply that nobody thought to mention that the thing which always works, works. The card I pulled for your sign is the 3 of Pentacles, a craftsman standing on a bench in a cathedral, working on stonework, and 2 other figures standing below holding plans, looking up at him, consulting him. I want you to notice the arrangement, because it is unusual in the deck. He is above them. The person with the practical skill is physically higher than the people with the drawings, and they have come to him, and they are asking. That is the card of expertise being formally recognized, my darling, and it is the only card in the deck that depicts a person being consulted rather than assessed. It appeared for your sign tonight because a considerable amount of Virgo news, when it finally arrives in explicit form, turns out to be a version of this. Somebody wants your judgment, not your labor, which they have always had, your judgment. So here is your guidance, and it is different again. When you notice a discrepancy, write it down with the date, and do not conclude anything. That is the whole practice, and it is designed specifically around your sign's failure mode. You will not stop noticing, and I would not want you to, but your sign does one of 2 things with a notice detail, and both are wrong. Either you dismiss it entirely as overthinking, or you build a complete explanatory structure on it within about 4 minutes, and then defend the structure. The record breaks both habits, because it requires you to preserve the observation without resolving it, and preserving something unresolved is the specific discipline your sign lacks. 6 weeks of that, and you will have a pattern rather than a suspicion. Patterns can be acted on. Suspicions cannot. And the same small request I made of the other 2, my darling, think back. Is there a detail you noticed recently and dismissed? A discrepancy you talked yourself out of? Do not act on it and do not investigate it. Simply note that you noticed it. I will explain very shortly why I keep asking this. Now, before I speak to Leo, let me pause for a moment, my darlings. We are 3 signs in, and there is 1 remaining, and it is the one whose mechanism is least like the other 3. If this is bringing you something tonight, tap that like button, because it tells YouTube this matters to real people, and it carries it to someone who is about to be handed something they have not planned for. And leave me a comment now rather than at the end, because I want to ask you something specific, and I would rather you answer before you know why I am asking. Tell me your sign, and tell me one thing you have heard, noticed, or been told recently that you dismissed, not something dramatic. Something small that you registered and set aside. 1 line is enough. Answer it now if you can. The reason will be clear in about 10 minutes, and I promise you the answers people give before they know the reason are considerably more honest than the ones they give afterward. Now let me speak to Leo. My darling Leo, your news is not delivered. It becomes visible. That is the distinction, and it is the whole of your mechanism, and it explains why Leos so often describe the most significant news of their lives in language that confuses everyone else. You do not say, I found out. You say, I realized. You say, it became obvious. You say, I think I had known for a while. Your sign is ruled by the sun, and the sun does not carry messages. Mercury carries messages. The sun does one thing, which is illuminate, and illumination is not the arrival of an object. It is the same room, previously dark, now lit. Nothing was brought in, nothing was taken away. What changed is that you can now see what was already there. And the sun has a property no other body in the chart has. It never goes retrograde. Not once. Not in your lifetime or anyone else's. It moves at a steady rate and returns to its exact original position in your chart every year, on or about your birthday, which makes yours the only sign whose ruler performs a completely reliable annual return. That matters more than it sounds. It means your illumination is periodic. It arrives on a cycle rather than at random, and the weeks around your birthday are structurally the most revealing period of your year, every year, for the whole of your life. If this video has found you anywhere near your own birthday, that is not mystical. It is that your sign becomes most itself at that point in the cycle, and things that have been sitting in shadow come into the light. Let me be concrete about what your news looks like. For some of you, it is something that was concealed, a situation somebody managed around you, a piece of information that others knew and you did not, sometimes for a long time, sometimes with kind intentions. This is the hardest version, and I will not soften it. When a Leo discovers she was the last to know, the injury is not primarily about the information. It is about the discovery that a room she believed she was at the center of had been operating without her. For some, it is a person's actual position becoming clear. Not through a declaration, through a pattern finally resolving into a picture. Somebody's real feelings, real intentions, or real level of commitment stop being ambiguous, and the moment of clarity has no external cause. Nothing was said, it simply resolved. For some, it is recognition arriving from a direction that surprises you. And I want to be specific, because your sign will misread this. It is not the recognition you have been working toward, which is a separate matter and arrives differently. It is somebody, often at a distance, often senior, often someone you had assumed was not paying attention, indicating that they have been. For some, it is professional, and it is retrospective. A door you thought had closed turns out not to have closed. A piece of work from years ago surfaces and produces something now. Leo opportunities have an unusual tendency to arrive from your own past rather than your present, and I have never seen this pattern as consistently in any other sign. And for some of you, the news is about yourself. A recognition of a pattern you have been running for years, arriving all at once, usually inconveniently, usually while doing something entirely unrelated. Your sign is the most likely of the 12 to have this kind of realization, and the least likely to do anything about it immediately, because a Leo who has just seen something clearly about herself needs a period of privacy first, and your sign is not naturally good at asking for one. The card I pulled for your sign is Justice. An enthroned figure, upright, holding a sword raised in one hand and a set of scales held level in the other, facing directly forward. She is the only major figure in the deck who looks straight out at the viewer without any inclination of the head. That is the card of the matter finally being weighed, not punished, weighed, and the two objects matter equally. The scales are the assessment. The sword is what follows from it, and it is upright rather than lowered, which means the assessment is not the end of the process. Justice appeared for you tonight because Leo news, more than any of the other three signs, tends to settle something. It does not open a question, it closes one. And what makes it difficult is precisely that, because an open question can be lived alongside indefinitely, and a settled one requires a response. So here is your guidance, and it is the one I want you to hold most carefully. When something becomes clear, do not act while you are still lit up. Illumination produces an enormous amount of energy in your sign, and the energy feels like clarity and is not the same thing. The moment after a Leo sees something plainly is the moment she is most likely to make an irreversible move, and it is the worst possible moment to make one, because the response you generate in the first hours of seeing clearly is calibrated to the shock of seeing rather than to what you actually want. Give it 3 days. Not 1, which is enough for Aquarius. 3. Your sign burns longer. And I will add one thing that applies only to you among tonight's 4. When something becomes clear to a Leo, the impulse is very often to make it public, to say it, announce it, settle it in front of witnesses, because your sign is ruled by the sun and the sun does not do anything privately. My darling, resist that for the same 3 days. A thing said aloud in front of other people becomes a position you then have to defend, and you will find yourself defending a conclusion you reached in the first hour of seeing clearly, long after you have stopped agreeing with it. Tell one person if you need to, not the room. And then the same small request I have made of the other 3, my darling. Think back. Has something already been becoming clear? Not arrived. Becoming clear. A thing you have half seen and set down again, more than once, over the last while. Do not act on it. Simply note that you have been half seeing it. That is all 4 signs. And now I want to tell you why I have asked the same odd question at the end of every single section. But first, let me speak to the 8 signs I have not named, because I do not believe in a video that addresses a third of the zodiac and leaves everyone else standing outside the door. Aries, your news arrives as an opening rather than an item. Your ruler is Mars, and Mars does not deliver information, it creates conditions. What you receive tends not to be a message, but a moment in which action becomes suddenly possible. Your risk is not missing it, it is taking it before you have checked what it costs. Taurus, your news arrives slowly, and it arrives as confirmation of something you have suspected for a considerable time. Venus governs you, and Venus does not rush. Your sign very rarely receives a genuine surprise, and when you do, it is nearly always financial or material, and it nearly always concerns something you already own. Cancer, your news arrives through people, and specifically through the family or the household. The moon rules you, and the moon is the fastest body in the chart, which means your information environment changes constantly and emotionally. Your risk is receiving news at the wrong point in your own cycle, and treating a temporary reading as a permanent one. Libra, your news arrives through another person's decision. Venus rules you as well, and your sign is structurally partnership-oriented, which means a great deal of your significant news is generated by somebody else and delivered to you as a change in circumstances. Your work is not receiving it. It is having a position of your own before it arrives. Scorpio, your news arrives as something surfacing. Pluto governs you, and Pluto operates by excavation, which means what reaches you tends to be something that was buried and is now not. Your sign is unusually well equipped for this and rarely needs my advice about it, except for one thing. Not everything that surfaces requires action from you. Sagittarius, your news arrives from a distance. Jupiter rules you, and Jupiter expands outward, so your information tends to come from further away than other people's. Another country, another field, someone outside your usual circle. Your risk is enthusiasm outrunning verification. Capricorn, your news arrives as a structural change. Saturn governs you, and Saturn deals in form, so what reaches you tends to concern the architecture of things. A role, a contract, a rule, an institution. It rarely arrives warmly, and it is rarely trivial. Pisces, your news arrives before it arrives. Neptune rules you, and your sign knows things in advance, with a regularity that other people find unsettling, and that you have learned not to mention. Your work is not developing the perception, which you already have. It is keeping a record so that you eventually believe yourself. Each of those is real, and none of it is a lesser mechanism. The 4 signs I named tonight are not luckier. Their rulers simply specialize in information, which makes their patterns easier to describe. Now let me give you the guidance that applies to all 4 of tonight's signs, and honestly to all 12, before I tell you the thing I have been saving. There are 3 things, and they are short. The first is that your initial reaction is not your position. Whatever arrives, the first thing you feel is a reflex, and reflexes are calibrated to shock rather than to substance. Relief, excitement, dread, vindication, all of them arrive fast, and none of them are considered. The waiting periods I gave each sign, 1 day for Aquarius, 3 for Leo, the written sentence for Gemini, the dated note for Virgo, are all doing the same job in different formats, which is putting distance between the reflex and the reply. The second is to separate excitement from rightness. Excitement is the physical charge that accompanies arrival. Rightness is a quieter and slower signal that sits underneath it. Some news is exciting and not right for you. Some news is right and arrives almost flatly. If you can only detect one of the 2 signals, you will consistently mistake volume for fit. And the third is to write down what arrives, whether or not you know what to do with it. not a journal, a record, date, and fact. Because the significance of a piece of news is very often not determinable at the moment of arrival, and a record allows the version of you who exists 3 months from now to look back and see the shape of something that was invisible at the time. And I will add a fourth, which applies particularly to anyone whose news turns out to be difficult, because not all of it is good, and I would be dishonest to structure an entire video as though it were. Difficult news is not made worse by being received slowly. This is worth knowing because there is a widespread assumption that bad news requires immediate response, and in the overwhelming majority of cases it does not. Almost nothing genuinely requires an answer within a day. The pressure to respond immediately is nearly always generated internally by the discomfort of holding something unresolved, and it is not a property of the situation. So if what arrives for you is hard, my darlings, the same waiting periods apply, and they apply more, not less. Tell one person, sleep, and then begin deciding, on a day that is not the day you found out. Pause with me for a moment, my darlings, because we are close to the end and I want to say something before I give you the last part. I made this reading evergreen deliberately, and I want to explain why, because it concerns the honesty of what I do. It would have been easy to build this video around a particular week, 4 signs, a specific alignment, a date circled. Those videos perform well, and they are also, in a specific way, dishonest. Because a person who finds one 2 years later is being told the sky is arranged for her when it dissolved long ago. Everything I have told you tonight is built on the permanent architecture of 4 signs and 4 ruling planets, and it will be as accurate whenever you find it as it is tonight. If this is bringing you value, would you do me 3 small things? Like this video. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube that this matters to real people, and it carries it to somebody who is about to be handed something and does not yet know it. Subscribe and turn on the bell if you have not, because I make these readings for every sign and I intend to keep making them, and because the 8 signs I addressed briefly tonight will each get a full reading, and the ones people ask for in the comments are very often the ones I make next. That is not a line. It is genuinely how I decide. And if you have not left a comment yet, do it now, before the last section. Your sign, and one thing you have heard, noticed, or been told recently that you dismissed. 1 line. And if you have been here a while, membership on this channel means readings reach you before they are published, and it means you and I actually speak, because I read member comments first, and I answer there more often and more personally than I am able to anywhere else. Now, let me tell you the thing I have been saving. But first let me tell you about Marjorie, because the principle will land better with a shape attached to it. Marjorie was a client of mine, a Virgo, who came to me in her 50s in a state of considerable distress about a redundancy. She had been at the same organization for 19 years. The announcement had come on a Thursday, and she described it, repeatedly, in the first 20 minutes, as having come out of nowhere. I asked her a question I ask often, and which people rarely enjoy. I asked her when she had first suspected. She said she had not suspected. It was completely unexpected. I asked again, differently. I asked whether anything at all in the previous 6 months had struck her as slightly off. And she was quiet for a while, and then she said, well, there was the thing with the reporting line. 4 months earlier, her line manager had been changed. It had been presented as an administrative tidy-up, and it had made no practical difference to her work. But she had noticed, at the time, that the new arrangement made no organizational sense, and she had mentioned it to her husband, once, and he had said it was nothing, and she had agreed that it was probably nothing. Then she said, and there was the training budget. Her department's training allocation had not been confirmed for the following year. Nobody had said it was canceled. It simply had not been confirmed, at the point in the cycle when it was always confirmed, and she had noticed that too. And she had drafted an email asking about it and had not sent it because she did not want to appear anxious. And then she said the sentence I want you to have. She said, I did not know. I decided not to know. My darling Virgos, and all 4 of you tonight, I want you to hear that carefully, because Marjorie was not careless, and she was not in denial in the ordinary sense. She had received 2 clear first arrivals, 4 months and roughly 7 weeks before the official news, and she had done with both of them exactly what a reasonable, conscientious, evidence-respecting person does. She had noted them, found the evidence insufficient and closed the file. And she was right that the evidence was insufficient. That is what I want to be careful about. She could not have acted on either signal. There was nothing to act on. A reporting line and an unconfirmed budget do not justify resigning. But there is an enormous difference between a person who receives that news on a Thursday, having spent 4 months quietly aware that something might be moving, and a person who receives it having decided twice that nothing was. The first one has a partly formed sense of what she would want. The second is starting from zero on the worst day. Marjorie landed well. In the end, it took 14 months. She told me the last time we spoke that the 14 months would have been 6 if she had let herself keep the question open. Now, here is the thing itself. I asked the same odd question at the end of all 4 sections tonight, and I told you at the beginning to listen for a detail that repeated. Stu, Aquarius, I said, has something unusual already brushed past you. Stu, 2, Gemini, has something already passed through that you registered and did not act on. To Virgo, is there a detail you noticed and dismissed? To Leo, has something already been becoming clear that you have half seen and set down again? 4 different phrasings, 1 question, and here it is. The news arrives twice. That is the thing, my darlings, and I have watched it for 35 years, and I have never once seen it written down anywhere. And it is the single most useful piece of information I have about how significant news actually behaves. Almost nothing important arrives cleanly the first time. Before the official version, the one with the phone call or the letter or the conversation, there is nearly always an earlier arrival, smaller, deniable, easy to dismiss, a remark somebody made in passing, a rumor that seemed unreliable, a half offer that was not quite an offer, a detail that did not fit, a feeling on a Tuesday afternoon that something was shifting, which you attributed to being tired. And it is dismissed. Every time. Not through stupidity, but because the first arrival never carries enough evidence to justify acting on it, and every sensible person requires evidence before acting. Then, weeks or months later, the same information arrives properly, and the person receiving it says, "Some part of me already knew." They did. It was the first arrival. It came and it was discarded, because it was not yet in a format that could be believed. Now let me tell you why this matters practically, because I do not raise it simply to be interesting. The people who do well when significant news arrives are almost never the people who react best in the moment. They are the people who were already partly prepared, and they were partly prepared because they took the first arrival seriously, not by acting on it, by allowing it to remain open as a possibility rather than closing it. That is the entire difference, and it is very small. 2 people receive the same faint early signal. One dismisses it, and the file closes. The other does not act on it either, but does not close the file. And so when the second arrival comes, they have had 3 months of quietly living alongside the possibility, and they are not ambushed. And this is why each of the 4 signs tonight has a different relationship to it, which I will now make explicit. Aquarius. Your first arrival is usually a person. Somebody appears, briefly, in an unusual context, and then goes away, and returns later attached to something significant. You dismiss it because it was a peripheral contact and you file peripheral contacts efficiently. Gemini, your first arrival is genuinely buried because it arrived in a stream containing 400 other items that day. You dismiss it because it looked exactly like everything else. Nothing about its presentation distinguished it. Virgo, your first arrival is the discrepancy, and you did not dismiss it because you failed to notice, since you noticed immediately. You dismissed it because you could not justify it, and your sign requires justification. My darling, of the 4 signs here tonight, you are the one who most reliably receives the first arrival and most reliably discards it. And the discarding is done out of intellectual honesty rather than carelessness, which makes it considerably harder to correct. And Leo, your first arrival is a partial illumination. You saw it, imperfectly, and looked away, because it was not yet fully lit, and because your sign does not like to be uncertain in front of itself. You have half seen the same thing more than once, probably, and each time you have set it back down. So here is what I would ask of all 4 of you, and it is not difficult, and it takes almost no effort. Do not close the file. That is all. When something faint arrives, you do not need to act on it, and I am specifically telling you not to, because acting on insufficient evidence is a worse error than dismissing. But you do not have to file it as nothing either. There is a third position, and almost nobody uses it, and it is simply this: note it, date it, and leave it open. Then, if the second arrival comes, you will not be ambushed. And if it never comes, you have lost nothing whatsoever, because leaving a file open costs you a line in a notebook and a small amount of tolerance for not knowing. And now I would like you to do one last thing. Look at what you wrote in the comments. The thing you heard or noticed recently and dismissed. I asked for that before I told you any of this, deliberately, because I wanted you to name it while it was still simply a small dismissed thing rather than a candidate. Some of you have just gone very quiet. I am not going to tell you that what you wrote is your first arrival. I do not know that, and anyone who tells you they do know is selling you something. Most of what any of us dismisses is correctly dismissed, and I would be doing you no favors by encouraging you to treat every passing remark as a prophecy. But some of you know. You are looking at that line right now and something in you has responded, and it is not a coincidence that of everything available to you, that is what came to mind when a stranger asked. Do not act on it. Just do not close it. My darlings, before I let you go, 3 small things. 1. If any part of this reading found you tonight, if the mechanism for your sign explains something you have never had language for, tap that like button. It is the simplest way to tell YouTube to carry this to another person who is currently sitting on a first arrival and calling it nothing. 2. Subscribe and turn on the bell. I make these readings for every sign, and I make them so they can be found whenever someone needs them, rather than only during a particular week. If you become a member, readings reach you before they are published, and you and I actually speak in the comments, because I read member comments first. 3. And this is the one I care about most. If you have already commented, go back and add one word underneath it. Just one. Open. That is all. It costs you nothing. And I want you to have marked it publicly, because a thing you have marked in front of other people is considerably harder to quietly discard. And the discarding is the entire problem. And if you were one of the 8 signs I addressed briefly, tell me which one you are. And I will tell you honestly that the full readings are coming, and that comment requests genuinely shape which one I make next. I read every single comment, truly. And I want to say why this particular comment section is going to be worth scrolling. It is going to be full of small dismissed things. Remarks, discrepancies, half-offers, feelings on Tuesday afternoons. And every single Aquarius, Gemini, Virgo, and Leo who reads it is going to recognize at least 3 as things that have also happened to her and that she also closed the file on. And if this reading gave you something and you ever want to say thank you more directly, a super thanks is never expected and always felt, and it is a genuine part of how I keep making these readings as carefully as I make them. If you know someone of one of these 4 signs who has been sensing something they cannot name, send this to them tonight. You may not realize how much a single share matters. It is how this work finds the person who needs it. Thank you, my darlings. This community has become something I genuinely did not expect when I began. 4 signs, 4 mechanisms. Aquarius, struck without warning. Gemini, buried in the stream. Virgo, arriving as a detail too small to justify. And Leo, becoming visible in a room that was always lit and simply not looked at. Different signs, different rulers, different kinds of news entirely. And every one of them arrives twice. You will very likely miss the first one. Almost everybody does, and there is no shame in it, because the first arrival never carries enough evidence to be believed. Just do not close the file. I am Madame Aurora from Manhattan, and I love you, all 12 signs of the Zodiac. I will see you in the next reading.